Every major forecasting agency on the planet agrees this El Niño is racing toward one of the most extreme peaks ever recorded, with confidence high enough that 30 separate model ensemble members are converging on nearly the same trajectory. But it's not the peak itself that's making forecasters genuinely uneasy right now. It's what their models are showing on the other side of it, the descending slope nobody wanted to see, a potential collapse so fast and so violent it could flip the entire planet's weather pattern within a matter of months. Let's start with exactly where this event actually stands right now, because getting the timeline right matters enormously for understanding what comes next. As of the middle of August, this El Niño hasn't peaked yet. It's still intensifying. The latest experimental predictions from NOAA's Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory show high confidence that the event will continue strengthening through the fall, with its peak most likely arriving somewhere between October and January. Sea surface. Temperature anomalies in the key. Niño 3.4 region climbed from roughly 1 degree Celsius above average in the spring to more than 2 degrees Celsius by mid-July. And forecasters now project ocean temperatures could reach an average peak of around 4.1 degrees Celsius above normal by December, a level that would place this event among the strongest ever measured. What makes this specific El Niño so remarkable isn't only its raw strength, it's the sheer speed at which it developed. As recently as winter 2025, the tropical Pacific was still sitting in a La Niña phase, running cooler than average. The swing from that cool phase into what's now shaping up as a potential super El Niño happened faster than anything scientists have documented since reliable data collection began in the 1950s. One climate researcher involved in tracking the event described it plainly as an unusual forecast, adding that unusual, in this context, only goes back about 75 years of recorded history. That speed and intensity have already produced measurable global consequences well before this event has even reached its peak. Researchers have linked this developing El Niño to an increased frequency of heat domes worldwide, nonstop temperature, records across Peru, and deadly storms in Chile. It's also been connected to destructive typhoons forming across the western Pacific, and to the unusually quiet Atlantic hurricane season observed so far this year, since El Niño's characteristic wind shear tends to tear apart, developing tropical storms before they can strengthen. NOAA's own August hurricane outlook update raised the probability of a below-average Atlantic season from 55% to 75%, directly citing this strengthening El Niño as the primary driver. Colorado State University's own August forecast similarly called for just 9 named storms and 4 hurricanes this season, including only 1 major hurricane, numbers considerably below what a typical Atlantic season would otherwise produce. El Niño's impacts also don't hit every region simultaneously or in the same way, and understanding that staggered rollout matters for grasping at just how far-reaching this event's consequences are likely to become as it continues intensifying toward its eventual peak. Effects typically emerge first in the tropics before gradually spreading outward across Australia, Asia, the Americas, and Africa. Australia, Southeast Asia, and the northern United States and Canada tend to turn hotter and drier under El Niño conditions, raising drought and wildfire risk considerably. India frequently experiences disruptions to its critical monsoon rainfall. Meanwhile, the southern United States, Chile, Argentina, and parts of East Africa typically see wetter conditions and elevated flooding risk. An uneven global distribution of consequences that makes this single climate pattern relevant to agricultural planning, water management, and disaster preparedness across nearly every populated continent simultaneously. Humidity impacts deserve particular attention too, since they compound the raw temperature risk in ways that don't always make it into simpler heat-focused headlines. Current projections suggest around 2.2 billion people across the globe face at least a meaningful chance of experiencing humidity levels ranking among the top 5% of historical values for their specific time of year, spanning regions from the west coast and intermountain west of the United States through a broad stretch connecting the southeast to the mid-Atlantic. Much higher than normal humidity is also considered likely across large portions of the global tropics, a combination that meaningfully elevates heat stress risk and, in many regions, the conditions that allow mosquito-borne illnesses to spread more readily. So, with all of that intensity still building toward a peak still months away, why are forecasters already so focused on what happens after it? The answer comes down to a striking historical pattern that meteorologists have documented across the handful of comparably powerful El Niño events recorded since 1970. Looking back at this, every previous Super El Niño during that stretch, 4 out of 5 were followed almost immediately by a swing into La Niña conditions the very next year. If that pattern holds true again this time, the extreme warmth building right now could be setting the stage for a rapid reversal into La Niña sometime in 2027. That's precisely the scenario generating genuine concern among forecasters tracking this event. The core worry isn't simply that a Swing back toward La Nina would happen eventually, and so naturally cycles between phases over time. That part is expected. The concern is specifically about speed. A transition this abrupt, from a potentially record-breaking Super El Nino directly into La Nina within roughly a year, would represent an extraordinarily fast reversal by historical standards. And forecasters are still working to understand exactly what that kind of whiplash would mean for global weather patterns already straining to adapt to this year's extremes. If you're finding this kind of grounded, evidence-based breakdown genuinely valuable, go ahead and hit that like button. It makes a real difference, helping this channel reach more people who want the real science behind these headlines instead of vague alarm with nothing to back it up. Understanding why such a powerful event might collapse so quickly requires understanding a bit about the physical mechanics driving El Nino in the first place. These events are fundamentally powered by an enormous reservoir of unusually warm water sitting beneath the surface of the tropical Pacific, gradually surfacing and releasing its heat into the atmosphere over the course of the event. A genuinely record-setting El Nino draws down that subsurface heat reservoir considerably faster and more completely than a moderate event would, essentially spending its fuel at an accelerated rate compared to weaker, more gradual events recorded in previous decades. Once that reservoir becomes sufficiently depleted, the system can lose its underlying energy source relatively abruptly, creating exactly the kind of conditions that have historically preceded a rapid swing into the opposite, cooler La Nina phase. The practical consequences of that potential swing are genuinely significant and considerably different from what the world is currently experiencing under El Nino conditions. La Nina typically brings colder, wetter winters across the northern United States and similar high-latitude regions, while the southern United States tends to turn considerably drier by comparison, essentially the reverse of many of El Nino's characteristic impacts. La Nina years also tend to amplify Atlantic hurricane activity rather than suppress it, meaning a rapid transition could mean the Atlantic swings from this year's unusually quiet hurricane season directly into a considerably more active one as early as the following year. It's genuinely important to be honest about the uncertainty still surrounding this specific scenario, rather than presenting a rapid collapse as a foregone conclusion. Researchers studying this potential transition have been careful to note that it remains actually follow that historical 4 out of 5 pattern, or whether it will diverge from precedent entirely, as ENSO cycles have, occasionally done in the past when underlying ocean conditions didn't behave exactly as previous events would suggest. The coming months, as this El Nino continues intensifying toward its eventual peak, will be crucial for observing exactly how the underlying ocean heat reservoir evolves and how quickly the atmosphere ultimately vents that accumulated energy back out. There's also a broader climate context worth understanding here, since some researchers have raised the question of whether increasingly dramatic swings between El Nino and La Nina might themselves be connected to the planet's overall warming trend. While it remains genuinely unclear whether a changing global climate is directly driving this specific rapid flip, researchers note that more dramatic swings between these two opposite ENSO phases do align with what climate models have generally projected as global warming continues. That connection, even acknowledged with appropriate scientific caution, adds another layer of significance to why this event's unusually fast development and potentially equally fast collapse are being watched so closely by the broader research community, particularly as it unfolds alongside other ocean circulation systems that scientists are separately monitoring for signs of long-term destabilization tied to the same underlying warming trend. The stakes attached to correctly forecasting this transition extend well beyond scientific curiosity, too. Scientists broadly expect 2027 to rank among the hottest years ever recorded, potentially surpassing 2024's previous record of roughly 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, as this El Nino's accumulated heat continues radiating into the global atmosphere even as the ocean pattern itself begins shifting toward its next phase. Some longer-range projections have even suggested global temperatures could push toward 1.7 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels in 2027, a figure that would represent a genuinely significant, if likely temporary, breach of the threshold nations agreed to under the Paris Agreement. Agricultural planning, energy markets, and disaster preparedness efforts across multiple continents are all already factoring in the considerable uncertainty this potential swift transition introduces, since a rapid flip from El Nino to La Nina would meaningfully reshape seasonal outlooks for everything from Midwestern crop yields to California's flood risk within a remarkably compressed timeframe. At the end of the day, the genuine concern driving this story isn't that El Nino is behaving unpredictably in some mysterious, unexplainable way. It's that this specific event's exceptional strength appears to be setting up precisely the conditions that have historically preceded an unusually rapid reversal. Whether that historical pattern repeats exactly as it has 4 out of the last 5 times remains to be seen. and forecasters are rightly cautious about treating precedent as certainty this far in advance. But the underlying physics, an extraordinary ocean, heat reservoir being drawn down at an accelerated pace, are consistent enough with previous rapid collapses that treating this developing story with genuine attention, rather than assuming today's record heat simply continues in a straight line, is exactly the right approach heading into an already uncertain 2027. For anyone trying to plan around this uncertainty, whether that's farmers weighing next season's crop decisions, coastal communities assessing hurricane preparedness, or simply people curious about what next winter might actually look like, the most useful habit right now is treating seasonal outlooks as genuinely provisional rather than fixed, since conditions this far out remain subject to real, ongoing revision. Forecasters themselves are watching monthly updates from agencies like NOAA, the World Meteorological Organization, and various international climate centers, precisely because this event's trajectory remains meaningfully uncertain even with high confidence in its continued strengthening through the fall. A forecast issued today, reflecting current record-breaking El Niño conditions, could look considerably different by early next year if this event does follow its predecessors into a swift, dramatic reversal, which is exactly why staying updated matters more with this particular ENSO cycle than it might during a more typical, gradually evolving year. If you want to keep tracking exactly how this event develops, both on its way to a record peak and whatever comes after it, along with the real science behind every ENSO headline before it becomes tomorrow's viral clip, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an E. Update. Stay curious, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one, ready to break down whatever the ocean does next.